Well, hello and welcome everyone to our latest CDI, Cities Digital Consulting webinar. This month's webinar is titled The Turnkey Solution, How to Build, Test, and Promote to Production. And as you can see, a little Easter egg there, bad holiday pun, because, well, it's November and we're taking a look at Thanksgiving coming up. So you can see those big words in there. All right, glad to have you all here, and just a few items before we get started. We are going to take a look at some items. So let's go through that before we get into the details. If you have any questions or need help, go ahead and pose your questions in the questions box on that panel on the right-hand side. There's also a chat box if you want to enter questions there as well. And for those of you who want to take notes, feel free to do that. Take any screenshots or notes that you want during the session, or post your questions like mentioned earlier. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There is plenty of time and we can answer any of your questions as we go through this. We love to do that, and that is very fun. At the end of the session, and once you disconnect, there will be a survey. We do appreciate your feedback and look forward to hearing what you have to say, and look forward to any recommendations for improvements. And please note that even though you might be taking screenshots and notes, the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted in a few days up to our Cities Digital YouTube channel, which you can see at youtube.com. Go ahead and just search for CDI or Cities Digital. You'll find that channel, and then you can browse through all the videos and playlists that are available. All right, so our agenda today is in regards to Laserfiche forms, we're going to learn step by step how to promote your forms safely and securely to your production form server. A lot of people don't have a test server or just simply have a production server, and it really doesn't matter. The methods and techniques that you're going to learn today will apply in both those scenarios. So our agenda is to duplicate and edit forms for testing, and we do this from our forms designer tool. We'll take a look at all that here in just a moment. Also, we're going to learn how to download and store those forms securely, and then especially once you've got your system tested, we want to promote those tested forms processes into production. And then I'll cover some pitfalls and concerns to be prepared for when promoting from test to production. So there'll be a lot of fun here today to take a look at all that. When we duplicate and edit forms for testing, there is, when you're logged in as an administrator in Laserfiche Forms, you'll go to the Manage page. And for any process in the list, down below that you can't see in the screenshot, there is a list of processes. Select that process and then click that copy button that you see there with that double page looking icon in the top right corner. That will allow you to copy any process and then begin using that for testing purposes. If you are going to take a process from your production environment and put it into an actual forms test environment, if you're lucky enough to have that, you could download that forms process and then upload it into your test process. So again, downloading the existing process from production, if you want to maybe make a copy, you can do that as well. If you've begun in a test environment or just built a new one, or somebody has sent you a forms process that is brand new to your production system, you can upload it. And when you upload it, it begins the promotion process. And in that promotion process, there is a promotion wizard that is now available in Laserfiche Forms 11 and onward. They've updated it for version 11 with some nice features, a little interview wizard, and then you'll do some further configurations later on. But for the most part, the production or promotion wizard, I should say, is a very handy tool and allows you to set some items very easily. And then finally, at the end, we'll take a look at some of the pitfalls and items to look for when promoting into a production environment. Many times your process may include lookups, and the lookups need to be able to function, and that data source needs to be able to connect to that data source setting. And sometimes it's not available, and we need to set that up. We'll show you how to do that in Microsoft SQL. For testing, you might have had a pilot group of users, but then we need to set up access for your regular set of users. We'll talk about that and show you some of those tips. Any activities that include the saving of content to a Laserfiche repository, you want to make sure that that's been configured. However, the nice thing is the promotion wizard usually takes care of this, but you might have several different profiles that save to different parts of the repository, so you'll want to double check that. And if your process is sending emails, you want to make sure that your test server settings have been changed to your production email server settings. All right, that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at a few examples here of our promotion testing demonstration. And we have a list of our processes, and we're going to assume that I have a production server only. If you have just one single forms system, that's fine, no worries. So for any process that might be something you're going to use as a baseline for a new process, or you're going to make a copy of, and you have a process in your test environment, go ahead and select that process. And up in the top right corner, you'll have your copy option. When you do that, this process will be copied, and as we watch, it'll give you some dialogue. That'll then allow us to rename this process. So it is thinking about it. I think I did hit that copy option. Oh, I did it twice. Thank goodness. Okay, kind of funny. There was a little delay there, so it caused me to get into some pilot-induced oscillation and a little bit behind the curve there. So it made a second copy. Let's go ahead and get rid of that duplicate copy there and take a look at our new copy. As we can see, it says -copy on the process name. Go ahead and then jump into that process, configure it as you see fit, and then you can even rename it whenever you want. As we can see here, as the form loads, we then have our process diagram and the properties of the process up in the top right corner. You can go ahead and click on the name of that process and rename it to whatever you want. So that entire process name, you can name it anything you want. Description is optional, but I do recommend putting in maybe a date and name of the person that this process was built by and when. Go ahead and hit done. That changes the process name. All right. The new process that you're building, that you're going to eventually put into production, there's some settings that you're going to set during testing, and those include some of the notifications to staff. And if you look in the process diagram here, the first step after submission, this green circle, we've got a user task. Depending on the type of sick leave requested, you have two different user tasks. And the one thing you want to do in testing is go ahead and launch that details pane by double-clicking on the activity for that user task, and make sure that the username is configured properly. Now, it could be that you are testing with an actual username, which you could type in here, but if you want to test it yourself, there is a special token where you can point it back to yourself, and that will send this task to your inbox so that you can test it yourself. And that's the initiator token. If it's not in there, you can just type in INI, I just use that, and then that will bring up that initiator token, and that drops it in there. That means anytime a form is submitted and it goes to that user task, it will show up in your inbox because you are the person that submitted it. All right. And in fact, if you want to have any form go to the person that submitted it, initiator actually is a wonderful token to use. But for testing, it's definitely a valuable tool. All right. So with that set, and then you've saved your process here, the other items you want to set up are your access rights, and that's done in the navigation pane on the left-hand side in that light gray box here on the far left. And down towards the bottom, we have this access rights list. Who is testing this process? I'm going to leave this area here. Didn't really want to change it. And you're going to have a short list of users in this list. So you'll see that here towards the bottom, we have a list of a couple accounts that are accessing the process. Most of your test people will be submitters, as that submitter role is listed there. You yourself, whatever you're logging in with, you should be a process admin. Okay, so users and yourself should be in here, and just the test users, the entire population who might be using this process, you'll update that when we promote to production. Now up at the top, you might notice also, you might be testing internally, but if you have the forms portal, then you could potentially be making this process a public process so that the first form that's submitted is available out there on the public intranet, so that users or somebody not internal could submit the form, which then starts the rest of the internal processing. So that'll be remaining during testing as restricted, or you could make it public. Just don't advertise it on that URL until you're actually ready for production. And that URL might be different, right? So when you have a public form, it's going to use, and I'll show you that here, the process options settings. So if you go look at that, the one thing you do want to make sure is two things. Up in the top right corner, make sure it is published, and then also set the link value for that URL to be something unique. In fact, you could leave it with this randomly generated code at the end of this path of the URL, or change it up to something, whatever you want. Please note, eventually, this link path will become your public link to it. Once it's published and you're in production, you could provide this to your IT staff to provide links on your corporate or organization's intranet or any other public-facing sites where you might want to link to this form. So those are the two settings you might need to modify when promoting, but during production, this will be limited. However, for those users who are going to be testing with you, this process does need to be published. They won't, unless they're a designer, they won't be able to see this process. You might be able to trigger a form that goes to them, but if it's not published, other users won't see anything in their inbox, or they won't see it under start process for sure until you make it a published process. All right, so testing and configuration in a, let's call it a test environment, is really straightforward. Once you've built out your form design and built the process diagram, the rest is just internal testing until you're ready to go, and then you'll be able to move that over to a production system. So we're going to pretend that we have built this process or a process in a test environment, and now we want to get that into our production environment. So how do we do that? So back on our manage page, we've got our copied version, and we've tested it, and it's ready to go. All you need to do, first off, is select it, and then download that process. And so up in the top right corner, you're going to hit the download button, and that will allow you to browse to a location where you might want to save your process. And what's really interesting is that entire process, all its settings, configurations, whatnot, are in a single XML file. You can in fact see the name of the process here in the file name. The process name itself is vacation sick leave request -copy, it prepends business process on the end, and it is in .xml format. And go ahead and save it to your network. This is probably the best way to securely store your forms processes. This is a good way to back them up too, by the way. Now, all forms processes are saved in a forms database. I'll show you that in a moment. So if that's being backed up, which I'm sure that is being done, you are covered for the most part. But if you want to make version backups, so to speak, you can download this file and just give it a date so that anytime you might want to revert back to a previous build of that process, you can get to it by just uploading this file into your system. Go ahead and hit save, and that'll be there until you come back to it. All right. So a very interesting, neat tool for downloading and saving those forms securely. Next step is to promote into our production environment from our test environment. So having downloaded that process, I'm going to go ahead and delete that copy here. So don't be afraid, watch, we'll go ahead and delete the process, and it's no longer in the system. So the forms database has been updated. It's no longer aware that there is a process. Now we're going to pretend that we've just switched to our production environment. So I'll just pretend to go here to design. And what we'll do in the production environment is we're going to upload that. So you can click the upload button here to bring that process in. It's the same as if you went to the Manage tab and clicked the green button at the top and uploaded that process as well. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll upload, which is funny because now it took us back to the designer mode and we're in upload mode. So now we need to browse for that file. Go ahead and select it. And then we'll go ahead and do that. So on my documents path, I have a forms download folder. Go ahead and look for my copy or whatever. Go ahead and bring that in. So that'll, at this point, begin our promotion wizard. All right, so in Laserfiche Forms, we've got this. The first thing it does is checks for a sender's email, and that's configured in the process, but you don't have to set one when you bring it in. So skip this if you want, or put the same original email value in here. You just have to type it in. I'm going to skip that for now, and then click Next. Or if we really should be following best practices, make sure that's in there. And your test environment might be very close to your production environment, so this might be just fine. If it's different, go ahead and make sure that that is a new entry. Next up, it's going to ask if you have any data sources. Now, this process doesn't have any lookup tables that it's referencing, but if it were, we would want to make sure that it is connecting to that data source and it is enabled within the process. I'm going to show you in a second how we can do that if it's not done in the promotion wizard. So we'll go ahead and show you some advanced settings when that is done importing. Next up, it's going to ask us for different resources. Every form process could potentially be using different pieces. For example, you might have uploaded themes and include a logo, so that'll be there. You can update that. If you've got a payment gateway as part of your process, it might need to be updated. This one doesn't. Are you referencing any workflows in the forms process? Go ahead and make sure that those are connected and listed here. And for any file uploads within a form itself, you might need to change the file storage location. Maybe your testing was filing those documents to a different area than in production. So go ahead and make sure those are changed there. We don't have any webhooks. That's not frequently used, but if there are any, go ahead and change that. And then make sure any files that are being saved within the process to a repository that you have your repository profiles set and reconfigured. So this wizard allows you the chance and opportunity to set the correct repository and repository path within that profile in which to save your either forms or the documents that are being uploaded in that form if you're not saving just the form itself. Okay, so go ahead and make sure you edit that. This is just showing us some additional info in the dropdown. So go ahead and click that edit profile button, which will then allow you to configure your server name for the Laserfiche repository, and then enter the credentials that would be saving any content from forms into that repository. Best practice is to use some account that we know is used only by Laserfiche forms to store the documents in the repository. That way we know that its creation user is something like forms or whatnot. So that way we know that the documents that are sitting in our repository came from an upload from Laserfiche forms. Go ahead and click verify and update that profile. That should, with the proper credentials, verify just fine, and you won't have any issues. All right, the wizard then will just confirm that you might have some reports built. So that process might include some saved reports that use that process to display information. Go ahead and make sure that's in there. And then final step is uploading that process into your repository. So we should see that. It'll load up and gave us some warning message. But at this point, we can click open and view the issues. So the way we might check for the issues is use the validate button up at the top right corner there to make sure that any of our steps that are involved in the process are going to happen successfully. We have email tasks and a save to repository or save to Laserfiche task right there. And it should be using the profile, and I chose the wrong one. So we need to make sure that I'm using the correct repository profile. That'll update here in a second, I hope. And then we'll be good to go. Right, so it didn't like that. We probably should use some kind of account. Actually, I should probably use my forms account. Make sure that logs in. And that should correct the issue. These warnings, by the way, potentially could be resulting from a template and fields that were different in your test environment than your production environment. So this form is being potentially saved to this repository. And at the very bottom, you have this configure fields button for fields. And it's telling us that the template that was being used in production doesn't match what's, being used in test doesn't match what's in production. So that's a gotcha, right? You need to make sure that you do configure your template and fields from your test environment to your production environment as if they are different. Hopefully they're not too different, and hopefully you don't run into that problem. But if you do have that issue, if you didn't catch it in the promotion wizard, which obviously I didn't, go ahead and hit that configure fields button. It'll give you what's missing. So you can see that there's no template that matches, and the fields that we were using don't match at all either. So fix those. You can remove fields by hitting the X there. And then once you correct the template, most of these will go away, and then you might have one or two fields to fix, but should be fairly straightforward, and an experienced Laserfiche administrator would know which template and fields are there. So when you're building forms, you are potentially going to be touching other areas of the Laserfiche system, specifically in the Laserfiche administration area. So you could use the web management area or the Windows administration console, your choice. It all points to the same info. So forms may be using some of that, and that's why we see this message. I should have fixed that, right? But I didn't. All right, with those fixed, go ahead and hit save to that process, or before you hit save, hit validate. It will do the validation. Actually, it skips validation when you hit the save button. So you can misconfigure this and still save the process. So go ahead and hit that save button when you're done validating all your fixes. I'm going to leave it for now. So let's watch. I haven't fixed this problem, but as you can see, it allows us to save that process. Next thing, go and make sure that your access rights are now modified to fit the production environment. So your users, you'll need to update that list. You'll add them in and make sure that they're there. If you've got a group of users, you can add that group. Makes life easier instead of having to add individuals. But if it's a small population of users, no big deal. Make sure that the process is also published and that you share out the proper link in there as well. So once you've configured it, you go ahead and publish it, save it, and then you'll be able to share that link. That brings up just a hyperlink, and you can just copy it or send it via email. There is embed code. If you did want to embed this entire form into another web page, you can use this embed code so that's on a website and on a web page. Pretty fun. Do people use this that often? I really don't know, but it's there in case you want it. So that's part of the share options. Once that's done, go ahead and save that setting, and you are pretty much ready to go. Now, within the process itself, I did mention, I'm going to leave that page here. I did mention there's some potential database lookups. If you have a lookup in one of your steps on a form, for example, you've got a form and you have a list of information that's being looked up in the system. This one doesn't have any lookup rules, but if I did, and I wanted to tell the system, hey, look up information and look up into this database and use a particular table in that database, go ahead and select that. Now, what if this table doesn't show up in this process, right? You were in testing, it was working just fine, but now the wizard, you forgot to set the data source. That promotion wizard should have done this for you. What if you skipped that step and didn't do it? Well, this is where we can come back, and for every form, we can fix it. Now, that's a good point, right? There's 3 forms here. They all need to be updated with the lookup rule connection to that data source. But what if this data source isn't even here in there? Or even better, the data source is there, but you can't add it to your process. It's not a better idea, but let's say you've got your data source, it's been configured in production, so your other forms are using it. But this form doesn't seem to have this listed data source. It's not here. Well, how do you fix that? As an administrator, up in the top right corner under your account, you should have an administration tab, and that should allow us to navigate where we can set up our data sources. Now, the data source, we're going to assume that it's already there. So it's already here. However, our process, we find that it's actually not there. So what we want to do is open up the data source itself, click on that, and then make sure that we add or remove this data source to any of our processes. So if we click that button, we can go down and we can look for that vacation sick leave request copy, check it, and this will add this data source to the process so we can then use it in our lookups. Now again, the promotion tool should have done all this for us. We would have selected it, added it to all the forms, and that way we didn't have to worry about going to each of the forms individually like I'm doing now. All right, so go ahead and make sure that's in there. So now that source is available when we go and use our lookup rule little wizard, and we're able to then select it. Okay, so that's a gotcha that you might want to look out for. Okay. What else do we have? access, repository credentials, email servers. Okay. Now, sometimes your process might in the process diagram, so I just went to the wrong place, not in our form diagram, but in our process diagram, you might have enabled in your test environment some emailing. Now, your promotion tool should allow us to configure that tool, but here is an example of an email activity in the process. And it just uses, if you look at the properties, if we scroll down, do you see any place where we can actually set up the email server? Not really. In fact, none at all. It just assumes that you have an email server configured. That's done in the forms configuration utility that's on the forms server itself. On your internal form server, you'll have a forms configuration utility, and it will allow you to set up your email server that will be used by this process step. Okay, so make sure that that is reconfigured if it's different for production versus testing. Most of the time it's usually the same, but it could be different depending on your particular environment. All right, so that is a list of pitfalls and concerns. Lookup tables, data sources. One thing about the data source lookup, I'm going to go back to that. If you do have a lookup, you do need to make sure that there's a couple things configured, and I'm going to show you that right now. So one, in the services for the forms routing service on the server, so this is kind of looking under the hood, if you will, that service, if we look at it, ignore the way my setting is set for login, you'll want to typically make sure that the routing service is using a service account that's on your domain. And it's usually a special Laserfiche account. If you don't have one, go ahead, feel free to create one if your domain admins would do that for you. The reason why when we want to have a service account is usually we can set it so that there's no password changes set, unlike user accounts where we probably change our passwords every 3 to 6 months. These service accounts, we don't want the password to change, because if it does, and then we would potentially break the process without having updated the password within this service setting, right? The service may fail to run, which will break our entire forms processes, all right? So use a service account. Now, the reason why you're going to use a service account is that once it's configured here, it's going to make the calls to your database. So I have a database server here. So we're now looking at Microsoft's SQL Studio. And here's that data source. And in that data source, that service account should be able to, at minimum, do lookups into that table. So I just launched the properties, and I'm going to use the permissions tab on the properties and make sure that whatever service account was used, let's pretend that this domain account for Kyle was set. And then if we look at our permissions down below, it is set as connect and probably some other items, and you can set that. Now, if you're not familiar with it or don't have access to this, your IT staff can set access for that service account so that it can hit that database in order to do lookups. All right, so that's very important. So that service account is going to connect to your database and do those lookups. So when you went in and under the administration area and you went to the data sources, that's how that's connected in the background under the hood. Okay, so that's another potential area that might be an issue between test and production. All right, that was a lot of information. Hopefully that's got you thinking about some different ways to do things, and gives you an idea of how Laserfiche works under the hood when promoting from test to production. All right, so that concludes our main presentation. The additional resources we have, I mentioned earlier that we'll have this video up on our YouTube channel in just a few days. Other sources include the answers forum on Laserfiche's answers.laserfiche.com website. You can read all about and search for questions that might have come up regarding specific scenarios that have occurred to other users regarding any product. And specifically, you can even filter on whatever product you want. So Laserfiche Forms is in there, all kinds of great stuff. There's also a solution exchange link. These are actually both tutorials on how to solve a particular problem, as well as you can purchase or download other pre-built forms solutions that you could upload into your own forms server. So a really handy tool there. And then finally, if you have support questions, Laserfiche's support site is there. You can go to www.laserfiche.com/support or support.laserfiche.com for any support issues you might have. If they go beyond that and you need assistance, Cities Digital has a support desk. Go ahead and reach out to us at any time if you are a client of ours, and you can get support set up, and we'll take a look at any time. All right, want to thank you all for your attendance here to our Laserfiche Forms turnkey solution, how to build, test, and promote to production webinar. My name is Kyle, and we look forward to hearing from you later on. I'll stay on the call for a few minutes to answer any questions, but that concludes our presentation for today. Thanks to all of you for attending, and we'll see you at the next one.